Our final speaker for this session is Giorgos Gkiouzepas. He is an environmental scientist with a special interest in environmental politics and sociology, and he is currently a postdoctoral researcher in political sciences, focusing on grassroots environmental movements and unequal ecological exchange.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. I thought that I had everything figured out yesterday, and then the last session came, and I realized that there are a lot of common issues that were raised yesterday. So this is the bad news. There's going to be some overlap with what I'm about to talk today. The good news is that all the visual documentation about what I'm going to talk was part of Max Pillman's presentation yesterday, so you already have this input. What I'm going to try to do is I will deviate a bit from what the previous presenters were talking about, and I will try to incorporate some of the issues that they raised, as well as some of the issues that were raised in the conference in general, and link them with what we call environmental crisis. And I will try to do it by using an idea of an environmental sociologist, John Nuri, who in one of his books proposed plausible futures depending of how humanity is going to answer to two important issues, namely climate change and the diminishing reserves of fossil fuels. And I will try to do it not in the typical way that environmental scientists and environmentalists do, so like creating guilt and being didactic. But I'm not sure that I will manage to do it. But I wanted to start with I wanted to start by debunking a scenario that is very persistent, and this is the techno-optimistic scenario that we shouldn't care about what happens into Earth, because at some point we're going to be able to have the technology to colonize other planets. And this is encapsulated in the movie Interstellar, where, spoiler alert, actually, like, humanity is saved from a decaying planet by moving to another, colonizing another planet. But I think this has a fundamental flaw, and this is like, if we do have the knowledge, the deep knowledge, to recreate a system that supports life for such a long period, and like for it being able to be autonomous, then why wouldn't we use this kind of knowledge to create a sustainable social system here on Earth? But techno-optimism has a lot of faces, and like the most common phase that we have today is that we're going to have hydrogen technology and nuclear fusion coming, and we'll have abundant energy with low carbon emissions, and we will be able to have these mega cities that we have today without changing anything in our lifestyles, continue this high mobility that we have. But most probably this future is not going to come, because we haven't invested enough and fast enough to these technologies, and they will probably not kick in before we feel the consequences from climate change and diminishing fossil fuels. And even if it does, then we would have to deal with all the issues that, like, Kostis Pieros discussed yesterday, and Max Pillman also discussed yesterday. So another aspect of techno-optimism for me is the digitalization of manufacturing, the digital world, and the digitalization of manufacturing and mobility, which says that, like, by digitalizing our economy, we would, like, diminish the flow of people and materials around the world, and that would be enough to diminish energy consumption and carbon emissions, and we will be able to deal with this. And this is something that is already happening. We see it, like, with 3D printers and, like, all this technology that is already there. But this system also consumes energy, and most probably it won't have a decrease in energy consumption, in total energy consumption, that's going to be enough to tackle climate change or diminishing fossil fuels. Partly because of what is called the Jevons effect, that an economist that Mr. Theocharakis also, Professor Theocharakis also talked before, that we might have increased efficiency, but the overall demand does not go down, it increases. But there is another issue in this kind of society, it's like digitalized society, and it's like the open door, the door that opens to surveillance, so from like state and non-state institutions. So like the possible creation of an Orwellian society on steroids that we also kind of live today. So if this like don't work, then what? Then probably we are talking about a disaster, and we were talking about like most probably the most plausible future right now if we take into account the recent political developments in the US, but also like the developments in the EU where climate change is not so high the agenda anymore. And we are talking about much stronger conflicts about oil. We already have them, but they will probably won't be able to be contained in a part of the world, but they will go to a much greater extent all over. And probably because of the way that warfare is conducted today, this would lead to gated production and gated communities where the super rich will live, and vast areas where we won't be able to keep our social system because we won't have the energy to keep the infrastructure that supports the social system. But this, like, even though it might seem like a very dystopian future for most, for some people is an opportunity to kickstart an eco-radical society that will take into account the limitation that nature poses in humankind and the social and economic system. So if we don't want to go towards to this direction, then what can we do? And I think that what can we do is actually try to go to a low carbon society, to actually actively try to contract the economy and converge the differences between the global north and the global south, but also like the 99 and 1% in a local scale. And if we go towards this direction, then we have a lot of things that we can learn from Cuba, for example, that managed to deal with a contracting economy after the collapse of the Soviet Union without keeping some standards in the welfare of its citizens, especially if we take into account what happened in the former communist countries. So what we are talking here is localized communities with low movement, urban gardening, biking for commuting, and low-tech, labor-intensive societies. And also societies that will bring again back the commons as an organization of the production and organization of the economy. And this, and probably like vegan meals, so like vegans will be happy to in this setting. So, but this has also like some downsides, and I think like an important downside might be what Kostis Stafilakis talked about yesterday, the possible creation of a radical evil society, community. And I mean this in the sense that there might be communities that will focus so much into being within the limits of nature that they will actually become illiberal, totalitarian communities. So we should think about this as well. I think that it's not so, to make this happen, it won't be enough to go either just to low carbon society in a degrowth way, but we should also, in a way, at least for the first steps, incorporate the possibilities that like the digitalization gives us to work on. Though I'm not so optimistic as like the presenters yesterday were, that the digitalization is not just like a technological shift, but can also create an anthropological shift that we will see and understand and deal with the environment in a much better sense. All of the photos that I have in this presentation, there are actually photos of places that exist today. So all of these futures, in a way, exist today. And I can understand also that these futures can be, for somebody, can be an utopia, but for somebody else can be a dystopia. And what it was really interesting for me, and what I think that it's really interesting in what is happening here today and in the conference, is that we already saw a lot of projects that can deal with the theoretical and practical issues of going towards these futures, and also create prototypes where we can see the difficulties and the possibilities that these futures gives us. So that's it for me, and thank you very much.